attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele. Terry Morrone is the guest this week. He's a retired physics professor. He's an alternative media reporter and a producer. And he talks in this interview about the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence from his own perspective and about the brainwashing of the public when it comes to the 9/11 event. So stay tuned. I'll be playing that interview for you very shortly. Before we get to that, I want to play the following clip for you. This is from March the 12th on Washington Journal. The guest is Loretta Sanchez. She's a Democratic congresswoman from California. The entire clip is about 6 minutes, but I want you to listen to this entire clip and listen very intently. I've never heard a congresswoman talk like this, especially on national television.
We have over there on the intelligence side.
More to talk to you about from the papers this morning, but let me get to our first phone call. Brian in Elk Ridge, Maryland, Democratic caller. You're up first for the Congresswoman. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking my call. Congresswoman, I just have a question for you. Future generations are looking back at this time in history and asking why Congress ignored the expert opinions of over 2,000 building experts and the science that proves that pre-planted explosives brought down the third tower, Building 7 on 9/11. What do you have to say about Congress's failure to acknowledge reality and reinvestigate what really happened to a 47-story steel-framed high-rise?
Okay, got your point. Brian is part of a group of people that don't trust the government's investigation to what really happened on September 11th, 2001. Have you looked into the investigation that was done, and do you think it was adequate?
Well, again, first of all, I thank him for asking that question and for making those calls. It is incredibly important, if you will, for people who don't just take things on face value to continue to push on many of these issues. I will tell you that from the information that I have been able to gather, and I sit on the Homeland Security Committee for the House of Representatives. Its inception came after 9/11. One of the first things we did was to take a look at some of the issues, especially from the 9/11 Commission. But it's like anything else. You can only draw inference with the information that is available to you. So if some of it is closeted off, if some of it doesn't have the imprint to make it through the Congress, to bring it forward to the Congress, then it's difficult for a congressperson to get a hold of that.
Well, on that point, here's a tweet from a viewer. How much oversight does Congress really have on the administration? Can you control the NSA or the CIA to any degree?
Well, that again is a great question. I mean, again, you're looking at somebody who has refused to give carte blanche, who has refused, we pass a Patriot, I'll give you an example. We pass a Patriot law a few days after the occurrence of 9/11, and everybody, it's like their hair's on fire. Oh my God, we've got to do something. And it's not necessarily the right thing to do. And we continue to have that law, and then we find out that within that law, we gave some abilities for our intel people to do things, but they've taken it even further and, behind closed doors are doing even more. And now we know that they are. I mean, I've always been a bit leery of it because I couldn't get them to tell me what they were doing, or conflicting statements. You go around and you ask different people, you try to connect the dots to see, are they telling me the truth? And honestly, in many cases, they even refuse to talk to many of us. And so when you ask, are we doing oversight? We are trying to do oversight. Is it overwhelming, and do they push back? Yes. How can you ask questions about things that you don't know exist when they truly exist? So especially when they sit there and they tell you, well, no, we don't do anything like that, and later you find out they do. So we try to do the oversight, but I think people are always so scared about defense and homeland security and intelligence. It's like, oh, Congresswoman, you don't want a terrorist attack to happen because, then it will have been your fault that you investigated so deep into what we really do. Well, it's time for the Congress to really investigate what's going on over in that whole arena, because it's pretty closed off for us to see what's really happening.
Speaking of that whole arena, let's go to Robert next in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Independent caller. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Greta. I wanted to ask Representative Sanchez, is it possible that there are rogue elements in the CIA or other agencies also that have their own agenda and are not following the directives of the administration? Thank you.
Well, Robert, as you know, any time that you are overseeing a group of people, I mean, that's why we pay managers so much money in order to, work well with whatever set of employees they have. So anytime that you have an agency that's fairly large, anytime that you have a decentralized agency, in particular, a CIA or something like that, could be in, hundreds of countries in the world, have operatives or have people, etc. It's even more difficult to do oversight. So I guess the answer that I would tell you is that I would be surprised if there weren't some rogue elements within some of these agencies that aren't following directives or, think something is, more important or doing things not by the book. I would say that that's more probable than not. Just given the size of organizations and what I've seen as a manager.
And the Washington Times front page this morning reports that the demand for special operations is up. And get their perspectives. Royce in Wildwood, New Jersey, Republican caller. Hi there. Hey, Royce, you were on the air with Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez.
Hello, thank you. I've been watching your show for some time now, and I just want you to know that I think it's a shame that you are silencing those people that continue to talk about 9/11. They should have an investigation for Building 7. Infowars.com, investigate 9/11. Bye-bye.
All right. Royce, we haven't silenced them, and they're welcome to call into the show. They have called into the show.
And I think I said it's a good thing for people to push and to talk to their congresspeople and to suggest there might be other answers. I mean, sometimes the best information, honestly, the best information we get come from our constituents who tell us, have you seen this? Have you seen that document? Have you talked to this person? We found out a lot of things that way.
And when a congressperson is sitting here and we get those phone calls, we welcome them to respond. If it's off topic, then we will move on. Let's talk to Thomas in Fresno, California. Independent caller. Hi.
So there you go, folks. Loretta Sanchez from California. In case you were wondering, the static noises were just breaks in the clip. I edited out some parts that weren't relevant just for time's sake. But a couple of things I want to comment on after hearing this clip myself again for probably the third or fourth time since I first viewed it. First of all, let this be the answer to those who say that nobody will ever listen. Okay? It's like anything. It's the Congress. It's like any kind of organized body. There are good people, there are bad people, there are disinterested people, there are people who are just not awakened, who don't know certain information. All right, it's made up of people. Now, while I personally believe that the system is designed in such a way as to keep these people from getting certain information from the public, you can break through, and one of the ways to do it is like what these callers are doing here, calling in on live television and confronting their congressional representatives with the evidence, with the information. In this case, some very insightful and very good questions being brought up. And the third caller, too, confronting C-SPAN. The host, Greta Bronner, saying that we haven't silenced them, and to a certain extent, they haven't. It depends on the host who is sitting behind the desk that day. There are hosts who still do continue to silence them. You'll see a couple of days later in the next compilation video that I'm going to be releasing of calls into Washington Journal about Building 7, that Peter Slen is still up to his old tricks, still cutting people off and marginalizing the whole thing. So it depends on the individual personality of the host. But Greta Bronner is one of the better hosts, especially as of late, So to be fair, I want to throw that in there. But it is important to keep on pushing back. And listening to Loretta Sanchez, again, I've never heard a congresswoman speak like this. And what I'm hearing from her, and this is my perspective, and feel free to write in to me and let me know if you disagree or have anything to add on to my own commentary, but I'm hearing someone giving me the bare bones facts of what a congressperson faces just in their day-to-day job. This is a woman that sits on the Homeland Security Committee, and I'm hearing a woman state that, at least me personally, and when I say me personally, I'm talking about from her perspective, so she's talking about herself, but saying, I'm doing the best that I can, but I can only go based off the information that I get from these intelligence agencies. And there's a part in this interview, and I'm going to put the interview up on 911freefall.com, the link to the C-SPAN video, so you can watch the entire thing, where she talks about intelligence agencies obfuscating and covering up and keeping information from the Congress. So I'm hearing a woman say, hey, I am doing the best that I can. And it's that kind of candidness, that kind of open-mindedness that people expect from their representatives. This is what makes people real statesmen. And this may be the first time that she's ever heard this information before. This may be the first time that she's even really explored it. I don't know. I don't know what her exposure to this topic has been. I know that she's going to be getting a lot more information about Building 7 very soon. But when she's doing this interview, this could be the very first time that she's ever considered it. And the real premise for this interview, and I should get this established, I should have established this from the beginning, is that this is where they found out, the week they found out that the CIA was spying on the offices of senators that were investigating the Bush torture program. Okay, so now members of Congress are finding themselves in the crosshairs of the government's war against Americans. Suddenly now it's hitting home. So this is the time to strike, to get the information to them and hit them with the facts, because I don't care who you are. When you find yourself being targeted by the post-9/11 world, that changes the game for you. And they may be more willing to listen. So I want everyone who's listening to this program right now to write Loretta Sanchez a thank you for her excellent response. I've never given an A+ on this program before, but that is as close to an A+ answer as you're going to hear, at least at this point. And right there, Loretta Sanchez laying it out, not dodging the question, taking it straight on, and admitting that there's a lot of things that people in Congress do not know, and that we have a problem here in America. And that is the first step towards changing things, towards collectively looking ourselves in the mirror and making a difference, changing the future, changing the situation that we're living in. All right. Before I play my interview with Terry Morrone, what we're going to do is what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all of the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. Do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds.
Terry Morrone is a retired professor emeritus of physics at Delphi University. He's a member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He's a writer for DailyCensored.com. He's a public access producer on Cablevision and Verizon. And he's the associate producer of In the Year of the Pig, which was nominated for an Academy Award. Terry, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I went over your background in the Reader's Digest version. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Well, I was a physicist. I worked in industry first for a while, and I went into teaching, and then I went back to industry. But I I retired from teaching, and then after I retired for real, I started getting interested in 9/11, well, even before I retired. I also got interested in public access because I was so appalled with the media coverage. Well, it started in the Vietnam War. I was appalled with the media coverage of the Vietnam War, and that's why I got interested in making that movie. And I helped to make the movie. The director, producer was Emil D'Antonio. But the media has gotten much worse since the 1960s when that movie was made. And so I started a public access show about 10 years ago.
Right, and I want us to get into that at some point in this interview. So remind me if it slips my mind, because I run into trouble trying to get things on my public access. I might be doing something wrong, and I'm sure if I've had the problem, several people in our audience probably have had it too. So you're going to be able to enlighten us, because you managed to get a lot of stuff on there. Now, how did you wake up, in particular, to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence, and what prompted you to take action?
Well, see, it took me a while. I kind of feel ashamed of myself that it took me so long to catch on. It took me almost a year, I think. And the reason was that I had been predicting a terrorist attack on the United States for years because of the atrocities that we committed in Iraq. In fact, I came across a video called Genocide by Sanctions, which the genocide took place during the Clinton administration, and a lot of Iraqi children died. In fact, there was this session on 60 Minutes where Leslie Stahl asked, what's her name, the Secretary of the Treasury, not the Secretary of State at the time, and she said, was it worth it? And she said, yeah, it's a hard choice, but I think it was worth it. And that kind of got me going. But at any rate, so I was expecting a retaliation. So when 9 o'clock, when 9/11 happened, I said, it's a terrorist attack, and then I got taken in by the towers falling, and everybody was saying it was Osama bin Laden. And even though I was a physicist, and some of my physicist friends, you'd say they knew it on the first day, but I was taken in. But then I began to hear things, see videos on the internet, and then I read David Griffin's book, The New Pearl Harbor, and then I caught on.
For you, what was the single most important piece of evidence that really caught your attention and really made you say, "Oh my God, there's something to this"?
Well, I sent away for the FEMA book, Building Performance Study or whatever, and it gave the amount of gravitational potential energy that was available. For the collapse of the building, and I compared that. Being a physicist, I like to calculate things. So I compared that to the energy it would take to grind up all the concrete, because I had read that almost all the concrete was completely ground up into tiny little particles. There was dust, it was like ankle deep. People were walking around. There's dust blocks around the World Trade Center. And so I calculated, I made an estimate of the amount of energy it would take to grind up all that concrete. It came out to be more than the gravitational potential energy available. Then I also calculated or estimated the amount of energy it would take to push the air out of the way and replace it with all that smoky mess that came out of the World Trade Center, that expanding cloud. And that also came out to be more than the energy it would take, the energy that was available from gravity. So it was off by a factor of 2 or 3, and that meant that there was negative energy or zero energy left for the towers to fall, so they would have fallen very slowly. If they fell at all, it would have been very slowly. So, and then I did a calculation of, made an estimate of how long it would take to fall on the various assumptions. I'm not the only one who did that. I think there were many articles on it, so I didn't think it was worth publishing any of that stuff. So, but at any rate, if it fell at all, it would have been a very slow fall. It wouldn't have been a free fall. Free fall implies that it took zero energy to grind up all the concrete and do that other stuff. So after about a year, I had proven to myself that the fall was impossible. But
right,
not even to, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and you did publish a paper on this eventually. You said you didn't want to publish anything originally because people were publishing, but you did. It's a very long title, but I'll give it out to our audience. The title is Proof That the Thermal and Gravitational Energy Available Were Insufficient to Melt Steel in the Twin Towers and 7 World Trade Center on 9/11. And for our audience, rather than grabbing a pen and paper and writing that down, I will link that up on 911 Free Fall for easy access. But you did eventually, you did publish on that. So you went over your argument there. What did you include in that paper that you felt wasn't being included in the literature that had been published as of that date?
Well, it started with an argument with a friend of mine who was a mathematician and a conservative guy, and I was trying to say that the molten metal could not possibly have been produced by combustion of jet fuel and the building materials because the temperature is too low. So he said that it's just that the beams fell to the ground and they picked up kinetic energy, and when they hit the ground, that kinetic energy was turned into heat, and this sounded a little strange to me. So I estimated how much energy would get turned into heat if like a piece of steel fell, whatever it is, the 1,300 feet or whatever the height of the towers are, and it came out to be negligible. I mean, it wouldn't be enough to raise the temperature of the steel more than a degree or two. So that's why I wrote that paper, just to dispel that one facet of the fall.
Right, and the paper goes very in-depth with this, so we'll have that linked up at 911 Free Fall for our audience to look at. Now, I'm very interested in this because there's been lots of talks about academics like yourself who have come out and spoke out about this issue, and, the consequences of doing that. Did you feel any of those consequences, even if it was just negative peer pressure from those around you?
At the time I did it, I was no longer an academic. I had gotten tired of teaching, and I went into a startup company. It was a get-rich-quick scheme, which didn't quite work, and so I was in industry at the time. But I did around the company, people knew about it, and I heard that. At least one person thought I should be fired from my job, but my boss didn't feel that way, so I retained my job for another 10 years or so.
Well, I wanted our audience to zero in on that because that is the situation that we are facing in modern day America. I was my last semester of college when 9/11 happened, so I was a kid for the whole for the pre-9/11 world, and they would always show these kind of dystopian movies where situations like this would be presented, and where folks who wanted to speak out about very common sense things like talking about a mass murder investigation, talking about physics, would be demonized, and where the whole society would turn against them. And I never thought like something like that would happen in our great enlightened age, but here we are. So, for anybody looking at our current president or anybody in the future who's come across this recording and looking back, this was a situation faced by many people in the academic world, not even just there, though, but also in the media world and political world, of why many of them didn't speak out, even if they did have their own concerns. You did, so that kudos to you, but how many other people know about this, choose to stay silent because of the pressures of maybe somebody will call for me to be fired just for having a point of view and not being quiet about it?
Well, I think there's a lot of people. I think there's 2,000 people who signed a petition for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and I think they're brave people or retired people, and I think the number would be much greater if there wasn't that fear.
Right, and the people in the media are going to have a lot to answer for someday, I believe, because of the mass peer pressure that they've willfully generated. And actually, I want to talk about this because you, like I said in your intro, you write for dailycensored.com. You write some very good articles. You wrote an article titled Brainwashing and 9/11. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I was kind of brainwashed, and it's the fact that somehow you see not what's really there, but what you expect to see. And when I looked back at it a few days later, I actually thought I saw the pancake effect in action, where one floor, where the building started to fall and came down, and it knocked another floor loose, and that knocked another floor, and so on, all the way down. And I was picturing that in my head, and I wondered, where did I get that notion? I think I heard somebody talking about it on the TV on 9/11, and I was completely taken in, and I think, and then I began to wonder, how come I was taken in, and being a scientist and everything, and so I read a few books on it, and one of them said that when the way you process information involves the amount of emotional content of the information, so it's like your brain puts a tag on it. So if it's something really traumatic, it's sort of put in a special part of the brain and primitive part, and you don't forget it. Like if you touch when you're a little kid and you touch a hot stove or something and you get a bad burn, you'll never forget that. So I think, when you're watching the towers fall, it's very emotional, all those people jumping out of the building, all the death and destruction. So you're in this sort of emotional state, and the information gets stored in this primitive part of your brain where reasoning is kind of shut off. And especially when they repeat the thing over and over again, it just kind of gets embedded in your brain there, and it's not rational, and you it's hard to get rid of that. And I think that it's sort of a well-known technique of brainwashing, that you do something emotional that evokes emotions and fear, and when you're in this fearful state, you're kind of looking for somebody who can explain it, who can say it's really not that bad. It's just one thing. It's just one lone gunman or one few crazed Muslims who are doing this, and and you grab on the first available explanation, especially if it's reasonable and it's repeated over and over again. So So you grab on it, and I think that's how I got brainwashed on 9/11. And I think I'm not the only one. I think the whole population almost got brainwashed.
Yeah, and I think most of the population didn't even think to consider there could be something up. I mean, there's a huge difference between the day before 9/11 and, well, then the post 9/11 world. And I'm not going to say the day after 9/11. It took years to get us to this point, whereas now, thanks to the alternative media, figures in the alternative media, looking at every single event and asking questions about it, people are more vigilant, and they don't trust things. Even some things that may even have be the official story could be correct. You know, they are looking at it, and I think that is a good thing. I don't think that you can you can look into events deep enough, especially when it has major implications on our country, and all suspects need to be considered, and whoever has something to gain from it. But on 9/11, the general public, from what I remember, and again, I was just a young guy, but most of the people didn't even have the notion that there could be something, that the media could be lying to us, the government could be lying to us. They didn't have that in their heads, that could even be a possibility. So the general public was just kind of waiting on the television, waiting for the news to come in like you would wait for your best friend, your favorite news person, because why would they be lying to you? And, even the news people, I think, are generally naive in many senses. Now, you said something earlier, because we're kind of going into the past here, about how the coverage of Vietnam really angered you and made you really start looking at things differently, and then it got put in hyperdrive, I guess I would say, in the post 9/11 world. How did this start? From what you're seeing, if you were to give your own analysis of what you witnessed in your life, I wasn't there during the Vietnam era, so I have to ask you this. What did you start seeing differently back then, and then after 9/11, how did it go into hyperdrive from your eyes?
Well, then I rebelled against the fact that the media was saying that we had a right to be in Vietnam. It was sort of a given fact that America was the most virtuous, greatest country on earth, and we had a right to go in there and straighten out things for the population, which was flirting with communism. We couldn't let that happen, and it was our right to tell them what to do. And that kind of got me ticked off. And I think my first brainwashing was, I grew up in World War II, and I was brainwashed at the time to think that, we were the land of the free, home of the brave. We were the greatest, the most beautiful, virtuous, brave country in the world, and we were better than other countries, and I actually believe that. And it took a long time of listening to talk radio late at night. I think it began to change, and then when I got into college, I knew this an Indian student and several Indian foreign students, and they told me how much they hated the United States. And that was kind of a revelation. I couldn't understand why they would think that way. And then they said that, well, we exterminated the American Indians, and they held that against us. And I hadn't even thought about that. I just thought of Western movies where the Indians were always getting shot, and I didn't think much about it because I thought they were savages. And I don't know. Maybe I'm not the only one, but I didn't think of them as fully as human beings, with a culture and whatnot. And that also began to change.
And I grew up during the 80s and 90s in what I would consider to be a pretty frivolous time. Not saying that things didn't happen, but the way that it was covered, the way that what was considered important, and I guess still to an extent, it's like this. During the 90s, with Bill Clinton's sex life being the big news of the day, and what I noticed like after 9/11, I noticed this on Fox News, and this is not even just to say that Fox News does it. All the networks do it, especially with the issue of what really happened on 9/11. But where the Fox newscasters would go after, like personally attack anybody that said anything or criticized Bush's handling of the war on terror, quote unquote. And they would not just attack what they said, because that's a debate, but they would go after their personal life. You know, whether or not they had depression, whether or not they had been divorced, or things like that, dragging that out. It prompted me to write an email to Fox News. I thought back then that might do something. It didn't do anything. But that was the early start of it. It was this kind of vicious turning of the media, almost like you're witnessing them turning into vampires in front of you. And you said that, and I don't know, you didn't use those words, but paraphrasing that it kind of went into hyperdrive after September 11th. Where did you see it go to hyperdrive? What was something that really made you take notice of that?
Well, I started out in the Vietnam era, but then I kind of I concentrated on my career for about 30 years, and I was just a mild activist. But during the Vietnam era, I went on all the peace marches to Washington, and I was in different peace organizations, and besides making that film. But then, I kind of quieted down. 9/11. Can I get back to something you said? You said that people are not so gullible as they were on 9/11. They question things more, and I think that is so right, because when that shooting at Sandy Hook happened, the public, a huge part of the public did not accept the official story, and judging by the number of things posted on the internet, they were, I don't know, seems like there were thousands of them, and so many people did research on it, and came up with, they examined all the videos available, and they came up with pieces of evidence and so on, and I think that's a very encouraging sign. It's the same with the Boston Marathon shootings. That a lot of good research was done by people in the public, and the official story was not accepted by lots of people.
Right, and I think that's a good thing, too, regardless. I mean, there's going to be people who don't believe that there was anything wrong with that, who are going to be grimacing and saying, how dare they? But again, I think that vigilant public, with their breath on the neck of officials, looking into every incident that has a major impact on our country is a good thing, regardless of whatever the truth may end up being. The only way you get to the truth is by having reasonable inquiry. And 9/11 is the example of how we don't want things to be, of how we don't want the public to be, for the last decade, just staying silent, and the second they hear the words conspiracy theory, just shutting their mouths, shutting their brains. It's like a little bell that the media rings, so that people, it's like a signal, that people just stop thinking for themselves. We don't want to return to that. And again, just to reiterate, that is a good thing. A vigilant public means a free public, and that is the only way that we're going to take our country back. Now, I want to ask you, though, because you said, you're talking about the media and propaganda in this country. How much do you think it's intentional from these media people, the folks you see on TV and reading the newspapers? How much do you think that they're intending to keep a lid on this issue? And how much of it do you think is just their own human ignorance, the fact that they're just like everybody else, and they've heard that word conspiracy theorist enough times that they have learned to turn their brains off, and they just are not going to go into it because they're following their programming?
Well, I used to be friends with several people who work for the New York Times, and I think that they began to believe their own propaganda. And they kind of had a different picture of the world. But I know from reading up on the media that the CIA has planted in the media agents, that is, paid people. And this came out in the church hearings in the late 1970s, where William Colby was brought up before the committee, and he was asked, does the CIA plant stories in the media? And yeah, I had noticed in the Vietnam era that there was a lot of phony stories about the character of the war in Vietnam. And Colby said that the CIA submits stories to newspapers and other media. And then he was asked, does the CIA have agents planted in the media? And then he said, I don't want to talk about that in public session. I'll talk about it in private. And then he was questioned in private, and he said that the CIA had something called Operation Mockingbird, and they had 400 agents planted in the media, and people in publishers, editors, people in important places. So sort of a combination of factors. There are a lot of CIA employees in prominent positions in the media, but there's also this tendency to believe your own propaganda after a while, to kind of like believe what's comfortable for you to believe. I think that's the case with my friends who are very smart guys. They were editors for the New York Times. One of them worked for Newsday, and they just, I would say, I would point out how I thought their coverage was terrible and whatnot, and they didn't agree, and I just can't imagine how they could feel that way. This is at the time of the Iraq War, with the build up to the war, and they knew Judith Miller, and they weren't that hard on her either.
It's amazing, 400 people at that time planted in the media. And it's funny, too, I can totally understand how some of these people, because I've said it on the show before, is the kind of people that get attracted, especially the folks that you see on the television set, who are there because they want to be famous, they want to be all-star journalists, and then they get approached by some CIA person. Now, I don't know how the exact process works, but they get told that they're doing their patriotic duty. Maybe, and I'm just speculating here on how it might go, but I could see it, the argument being made that, these 9/11 truthers are fomenting distrust against their own government, and you brave newscaster, are doing your patriotic duty in protecting America by keeping them stifled. Don't let them talk about that. I could see how somebody could get brainwashed in this way and feel like they're doing the right thing and completely compromising their journalistic integrity in doing it. But that's okay, because you're doing it for America. You're doing it for freedom. You're doing it to protect the government's freedom to do whatever it wants. Now, at what point, though, do you think people in the media and in the political establishment are going to start breaking away and speaking out about this? It came out now that the CIA had some issue where it's spying on the Senate, people in the Senate. And so how bad do they have to get first? People are people in so-called positions of power are finding themselves as a target of the post-9/11 world. How bad do they have to get before they start saying, hey, this is not in my best interest, I better start speaking out about what happened on 9/11?
I don't know. I know it is kind of hard to risk your job. I think a lot of them get religion when they're close to retirement. I know Dan Rather started talking about CIA and government influence in the media after he retired.
And Dan Rather is no longer on the television set either because of some issues that came up. People are highly suspicious of whether he was fed certain stories, and I won't go into that any deeper. But you can see this. You can see how people just sort of disappear when they start talking about this issue and how the media tries to keep it squelched. That's a huge part of our activism, is overcoming that and just keep on pushing the 9/11 truth message and the science and the hard facts to the general public however you can. There's people calling into C-SPAN almost on a daily basis, overcoming that programming, confronting public officials with the evidence on a day-to-day basis, and that is what you need to do. You need to speak out about it, speak unapologetically, and speak loudly, because when you show that confidence, then other people are bold and stand up too. Now, you've also written for your webpage about left gatekeepers. You wrote an article on Noam Chomsky and left gatekeepers, and I've had people talk about that on your show. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it works a little bit differently with progressive media. That it started to come out in the Church Committee hearings that the CIA funneled money through foundations to progressive magazines. For example, The Nation magazine, or Mother Jones, Z magazine, and these are fine publications, and they're right on most issues. But there's some, I don't know exactly how it works, but there's an understanding that they have to stay away from certain topics, and the principal one is 9/11. And in fact, there's some people in The Nation, like David Korn, or I forget the names, and they write very derogatory things about 9/11 truthers. They call them idiots, and I think the most virulent criticism of 9/11 people comes from the left media.
And that is so strange, because it seems, I've told the story before, how I had a friend who just hated George Bush, and actually I tend to lean somewhat towards the right on certain, not in the crazy, bomb the entire world into submission, right, neocon faction, but more towards the Ron Paul libertarian side. But I had a friend, who was just anti-George Bush. At the time, I hadn't seen anything wrong with George Bush myself, so I used to joke with him that, George Bush could cure cancer, you'd still find a problem with it. And then when I started to wake up to these issues, and it was hitting me, the physics and the science and all the lies about Iraq were coming out at that time, and I was starting to come around, I brought this up, and then this person just jumped down my throat and said, "I think that's horrible, that's disrespectful, how dare you?" And it was just so strange, because it just seems like the same people who vehemently disliked George Bush were out there protesting during the Iraq War, just refused to even look at the evidence. It's not even that they disagree with the evidence or can rationalize it away. It's just that they refuse to even look at it. And I want to know, how much of the self-censorship do you think is motivated by fear of allegedly diminishing their more mainstream stances? And what I mean by that is that if someone is talking out against the wars, or is talking about the attack on our civil liberties after 9/11, all of these issues that are championed by the left, and then the factions on the right too, but it's talking about the left right now, how much do you think they're afraid that their other positions will be diminished if they talk about 9/11 truth? So they stay away from that. They give up 9/11 truth, throw that overboard to help along their other agendas that they think are going to be more successful in being embraced by the general public.
Yeah, I see that all the time, because I deal with people in different peace organizations, and they don't want to think about 9/11. They say that if you talk about 9/11, you ruin your credibility, and so they don't say anything about it. And they always say there's so many other things that you can criticize the government on. So why talk about 9/11?
And I think that's so bizarre, because from what I've seen, and I monitor the calls on C-SPAN, folks calling in, and whenever somebody gives a positive response, if it's a person on the left or on the Democrats, who gives a positive response, they start watching for who's going to start attacking them. And usually the only people attacking them are the usual suspects, the people that people on the left shouldn't care about anyway, okay? So, you're going to lose credibility, but who are you going to lose credibility with? Bill Kristol? Why do you care what he thinks? I mean, that's like He-Man saying that he's worried about losing credibility with Skeletor. So, I just don't understand that. And so it's like there's this invisible judge hovering over everybody, making them feel guilty for even looking at this issue, looking at the physics of this event, but it's really not there. It's like a big boogeyman. It's really just a small group of people, and it's from the people that you're out protesting against and chastising anyway. What do you care what they think if if they're your adversary? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Is that the people who have been squawking about this are the people who have been trying to keep a lid on this topic since the very beginning. And there's a line in the movie JFK, Kevin Costner says when somebody attacks him. It's not Kevin Costner. He's playing the lawyer that investigated that. But it's my favorite line, and I always use this myself whenever somebody attacks me. Is you just cannot blame a pig for oinking. It's just what they do. So I guess this is my message to anybody, left or right. Forget the political paradigm for a moment. You're not going to be attacked by anybody of any importance when you speak out about this. If you are attacked by these usual suspects, it means you're doing something right. It means they are afraid of you, so they have to try to graffiti your activities with their nonsense. But people are seeing through it now. I mean, people are seeing the fruits of the post-9/11 world come out now. And so now all the conspiracy theorists, quote unquote, are being proven right. So this is the time to strike. Now, I want to ask you about public access before we end our show today. There's a lot that we can go into. I found a couple years ago when I tried to get 9/11 Truth movies on my public access, my cable provider is Time Warner. It seemed like I was stonewalled at every turn. They told me you had to go through these certain channels and it had to be approved. From my understanding, I remember going to college in Tampa. I won't get into the graphic details, but there would be things on 7 o'clock at night on public access channel that wouldn't be fit for cable television, for regular cable television. Things that your kids shouldn't be seeing as they're flipping through the channels. I was amazed that it would be on there. So what is the standard? What do people have the right to put on public access? How many hoops should they have to jump through in order to get something that isn't dirty, that isn't obscene, onto the public access channel in their local communities?
Well, I only know about New York State, and each local town, like I live in the town of Huntington. Huntington has a contract with Cablevision and Verizon, and they grant these cable companies, they grant them the right to use the town streets, and in return, they say that they want a public access channel. And in the contract, I'm not sure exactly what's in the contract, but in this state law that governs that governs public access, and the state law says that it has to be granted on a first-come, first-served basis, and that there can be no censorship of it. And that's in New York State law, and that seems to be followed because I've put on many 9/11 programs. In fact, I got in trouble on my job because somebody in my company saw me on TV expounding on 9/11. So it doesn't seem to be any censorship in New York State, because we have a good state law. Now, it could be where you are, the law is not so good, but...
Well, I'm in New York State, so that's
you are in New York State.
Yeah, now this was a few years ago, and granted I was kind of inexperienced, and maybe not even as assertive as I am now, because I've just been through the ringer and I don't care anymore. But it just seemed like I ran into a million hurdles that they said it had to be pre-approved before it went up, and that was not my understanding of public access. So
they're breaking the law. I mean, you could sue. You can really sue. And like, I sued Cablevision. I did it pro se. I didn't get anywhere, but I sued them. And you could try, or you might be able to get a lawyer too.
Well, maybe they weren't counting on that. Well, we'll see. I mean, I think I'm going to try to just to see what's up and see if I can get it with a minimum of hassle. But assuming everything's on the up and up, everybody is being honest and faithfully executing their responsibilities by the law. What does somebody have to do? Let's say you got a video, Blueprint for Truth or Experts Speak Out, you want to put on your public access channel. What's your first step? What's the process? What's it cost? And how do you go about doing it?
Well, I just turn in DVDs. I bring in a DVD or DVDs once a week, and they put them on. There's a certain format you have to follow. They give you guidelines. It has to be like 30 seconds of black and stuff like that before and after the video. But that's all you have to do is, well, first you have to apply. You have to make an application. You have to sign a contract. The contract says that if you get sued, Cablevision or whoever, Verizon is not liable. And you have to promise not to put on any pornography or stuff on there. But I've seen pornography on late at night, and that's you have to apply. And then I sued Cablevision because they replaced first come first served with a lottery, and I had read the state law which said that it had to be first come first served. And I found out there was no justice in the courts because the judge said I had no standing to sue. My civil liberties had not been jeopardized by them making it a lottery. But what that did was it meant that every 6 months the time of my show changed. So how do you build up an audience if your show keeps changing all the time and it's never advertised?
Right, and it's like these little tricks, and it's making you jump through these 7 extra hoops than you need to in order to just get your message out and have a show when you're up against major media corporations that have just seemingly unlimited money to just propagandize the public. So that is what we're up against, and that's, again, for the people in the future who are listening back to this time in history, this is what people were up against in trying to expose this massive crime. And I think we're going to overcome, though, because people have a lot of spirit. People believe what their country is supposed to be about, what they're told as kids it's supposed to be about. Even if you know otherwise, there's got to be something inside people that makes them want to live up to that ideal and believe that even if it hasn't been the way that they were told growing up, that they can make it that way. I really think people are motivated in that sense, is that they are trying to make America live up to the promise of being what it is supposed to be. And they think they're going to restore it to, even if it wasn't that way, the ideal way that they were told, they want to restore it to that ideal way that they once believed it was and make that a reality. And that's the great thing about human beings, is we can visualize something in our brains and then make it happen. We can build monuments. We can create civilization out of that and reach for the stars. And so, people have lots of hope, and hope is the first and most important thing to accomplishing anything. Terry Morrone, thank you for coming on 9/11 Free Fall.
Oh, thanks. It's been a pleasure. Nice meeting you and talking to you.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. You can also download the show by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.